The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Windsor Castle, casting long shadows across the marble floors. A royal guard stood at his post, motionless as always, but inside, his mind was racing. What he had just overheard was not meant for his ears, and it could change everything. His name was Thomas. He had served the royal family for 12 years. In all that time, he had learned one crucial rule: see everything, hear everything, say nothing. But today, that rule was about to be broken. It started 3 weeks earlier. Thomas had been assigned to the East Wing corridor, a quieter section of the palace where private meetings often took place. He noticed something unusual. Queen Camilla had been holding closed-door meetings with certain members of the royal household. Staff who controlled schedules, staff who managed public appearances, staff who decided which royals would attend which events, and Princess Kate's name kept coming up at first. Thomas thought nothing of it. The royals had their politics, their little power games. But then he started noticing patterns. Events that Kate was supposed to attend were suddenly reassigned. Charitable projects she had worked on for months were quietly handed to others. Her office requests were delayed or denied without explanation. Something was happening, and it was deliberate. One rainy afternoon, Thomas was standing guard outside the Queen's private sitting room. The door was thick, but not thick enough. He heard voices inside. Camilla's voice, calm and measured. And then another voice, one of her senior advisors. "We need to be subtle," Camilla said. "If it looks like we're pushing her out, the public will turn on us. But if she starts to feel isolated, unwelcome, she might step back on her own." Thomas felt his pulse quicken. He kept his face blank, his posture rigid, but his ears were straining to catch every word. "What about the king?" the advisor asked. "Charles trusts me," Camilla replied. "He's overwhelmed with his duties. He doesn't notice the small things. By the time he realizes what's happening, it will already be done." Thomas's stomach tightened. This wasn't just palace gossip. This was a plan. A calculated effort to push Princess Kate, one of the most beloved members of the royal family, out of the spotlight. Out of her role, maybe even out of the palace entirely. But why? The answer came 2 days later. Thomas was escorting a delivery to Camilla's private office when he saw a folder left open on her desk. He shouldn't have looked, but he did. Inside were appalling numbers, public approval ratings, and the results were clear. Princess Kate's popularity was soaring. Higher than Camilla's. Higher than almost anyone else in the family. And Camilla had underlined one sentence in red ink. "Kate's influence threatens the Queen's position as the most prominent female royal." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't about palace protocol or royal tradition. This was about jealousy. About power. And Kate had no idea it was happening. He closed the folder carefully and left the room. That night, he lay awake in his quarters, staring at the ceiling. He had a decision to make. A dangerous one. Should he stay silent and protect his career? Or should he speak up and risk everything? Because what he knew could destroy the royal family. Or it could save it, and time was running out. Thomas had always believed in duty. His father had been a soldier. His grandfather, a police officer. Service was in his blood. But now, for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure where his duty lay. The next morning, he watched Princess Kate arrive at the palace for a scheduled meeting with the king. She stepped out of her car with a warm smile, waving to the staff who greeted her. She looked tired but graceful. Unaware of the trap closing around her, Thomas wanted to warn her. But how? He was a guard. She was a princess. There were walls between them that couldn't be crossed, not without consequences. Still, he kept watching. And the more he watched, the more he saw. Kate's personal assistant was suddenly reassigned without explanation. Her new assistant was someone Camilla had personally recommended, someone loyal to the Queen, not to Kate. A charity gala that Kate had organized for months was moved to a date when she couldn't attend. The credit for the event went to someone else. Her private meetings with the king were delayed, rescheduled, or canceled at the last minute. Always with polite excuses. Always with apologies. But the pattern was unmistakable. Kate was being erased, slowly, quietly, and she was starting to notice. Thomas saw it in her face. The confusion, the frustration, the way she paused before entering her room, as if bracing herself for another disappointment. She was fighting to hold her position, but she didn't know who her enemy was. One evening, Thomas overheard another conversation. This time, it was Camilla speaking with a senior press officer. "We need to start planting stories," Camilla said. "Nothing too obvious. Just little hints that Kate is overwhelmed, that she's struggling with her responsibilities, that she might need to take a step back for her health." The press officer hesitated. "Your Majesty, those kinds of stories can be dangerous. The public loves her." "Which is exactly why we need to manage expectations," Camilla replied. "If the public thinks she's stepping back for her own good, they won't blame anyone. They'll support her decision." Thomas clenched his jaw. This was worse than he thought. Camilla wasn't just pushing Kate out of Palace's life. She was preparing to control the narrative, to make it look like Kate's choice. And if Kate tried to fight back, she would look difficult, unreasonable, ungrateful. It was a perfect trap. That night, Thomas made his decision. He couldn't go to the press. That would cause chaos. He couldn't go to the king. Charles was too close to Camilla to trusting. He wouldn't believe it. But there was one person who might listen. One person who had the power to stop this, Prince William. Thomas knew it was risky. If he was wrong, or if William didn't believe him, Thomas would lose his job. Maybe worse. But if he was right, and he did nothing, he would have to live with the guilt forever. He spent the next 2 days planning. He needed proof. Not just overheard conversations, but something solid. Something undeniable. His opportunity came during a late-night shift. Camilla's office was empty. The cleaning staff had already finished. Thomas slipped inside, his heart pounding. He moved quickly, scanning the desk, the shelves, the cabinets, and then he found it. A folder marked strategic planning. Inside were memos, emails, meeting notes, all outlining the plan to diminish Kate's role, to isolate her, to push her out. Thomas pulled out his phone and took photos of every page. His hands were shaking, but he forced himself to stay calm. One wrong move, one sound, and it would all be over. He finished just as he heard footsteps in the hallway. He slipped the folder back into place and moved to the door, his pulse racing. The footsteps passed by. He was safe. For now, the next morning, Thomas requested a private meeting with Prince William's chief of staff. It was an unusual request, but not impossible. He claimed he had information about a security concern. The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon. Thomas barely slept that night. He kept replaying the plan in his mind, imagining all the ways it could go wrong. But he also thought about Kate, about the look in her eyes when she arrived at the palace each day. Bracing herself for another subtle attack, she deserved to know the truth, and someone had to tell her. The meeting room was small and plain. No royal decorations. No grand furniture. Just a table, 2 chairs, and a man named David, Prince William's chief of staff. David was in his 50s, sharp-eyed and cautious. He had worked for the royal family for decades and had seen every kind of drama imaginable. He looked at Thomas with mild curiosity. "You said this was about a security concern," David said, folding his hands on the table. Thomas nodded. His mouth felt dry. He had rehearsed this moment 100 times, but now that it was here, the words felt impossible. "It's not a physical security threat," Thomas began. "It's something else. Something happening inside the palace." David's expression didn't change. "Go on." Thomas took a breath and slid his phone across the table. "I need you to look at these photos. And then I need you to decide if Prince William should see them." David picked up the phone and began scrolling. At first, his face remained neutral, but as he continued, his jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. He looked up at Thomas. "Where did you get these?" "I overheard conversations," Thomas said, "and I found documents that confirmed what I heard. Queen Camilla is orchestrating a campaign to push Princess Kate out of her royal duties." David set the phone down carefully. He stared at Thomas for a long moment. "Do you understand what you're accusing the Queen of?" "Yes, sir." "And do you understand what could happen to you if you're wrong?" "I'm not wrong," Thomas said. "I've seen it happening. The canceled meetings. The reassignments. The rumors being planted in the press. It's all connected. And it's all coming from her." David leaned back in his chair. He was silent for a long time, his face unreadable. Then he picked up the phone again and scrolled through the photos once more.
"Oh."
"Take this to Prince William," he finally said. "But I can't promise anything. He may not believe it, or he may not want to believe it." "I understand," Thomas said. "But he needs to know." David stood. "You've taken a huge risk coming here. I hope you're prepared for the consequences." Thomas stood as well. "I am," but as he left the room, he wasn't sure that was true. The next 2 days were agony. Thomas went about his duties as usual, standing guard, patrolling corridors, trying to act as if nothing had changed. But every time he saw Camilla, his heart raced. Every time a senior staff member looked at him, he wondered if they knew. And then, on the 3rd day, he received a message. Prince William wanted to see him. Thomas was escorted to a private room in Kensington Palace. It was evening, and the palace was quiet. He was left alone for 10 minutes, his nerves stretched to the breaking point. Then the door opened, and Prince William walked in. He looked tired, angry, and something else hurt. "Sit," William said, gesturing to a chair. Thomas sat. William remained standing, his arms crossed. "I've seen the documents you gave to David," William said. "I've also done some investigating of my own. And I need to know something before we go any further." "Why did you come forward?" Thomas met his gaze. "Because it was the right thing to do, sir. Princess Kate doesn't deserve what's happening to her, and I couldn't stand by and watch." William studied him for a moment. Then he nodded. "You're right. She doesn't deserve it. And neither does my family." He began to pace, his hands clenched behind his back. "My father doesn't know. I'm certain of that. He's been so focused on his duties as king that he hasn't noticed the smaller details. But Camilla has been very careful, very strategic. What will you do?" Thomas asked. William stopped pacing and looked at him. "I'm going to confront her. But I need more. I need evidence that can't be denied. Something that proves her intent beyond any doubt." Thomas hesitated. "There's a meeting tomorrow. In the Queen's private office. I'm scheduled to be on duty outside the door. If I can record it?" "No," William said sharply. "That's too dangerous. If you're caught, it could ruin everything. But it might be the only way," Thomas said. William was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed. "If you do this, you're on your own. I can't protect you if it goes wrong." "I understand," Thomas said. William placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you. For everything you've done. Kate doesn't know it yet, but you may have saved her." Thomas left the palace that night feeling both terrified and determined. Tomorrow would be the most dangerous day of his life, but it was also the most important. The morning of the meeting arrived cold and gray. Thomas barely slept. He had borrowed a small recording device from a friend outside the palace. Someone who owed him a favor and didn't ask questions. The device was small enough to hide in his uniform pocket, sensitive enough to pick up voices through the heavy oak door. He arrived at his post 30 minutes early. The hallway was empty. He checked the device one more time, then slipped it into his pocket and took his position outside Camilla's office. His heart was hammering in his chest, but his face remained calm. Years of training had taught him to hide what he was feeling. Today, that training would be tested like never before. At exactly 10 o'clock, Camilla arrived. She glanced at Thomas with barely a nod and entered her office. 2 minutes later, her senior advisor arrived. Then the press officer, then a member of the household staff who managed royal schedules. Thomas activated the recording device in his pocket. The door closed. For a moment, there was silence. Then voices began to filter through the wood. "We're making progress," the advisor said. "Kate has missed 3 major events this month. The press is starting to notice." "Good," Camilla replied. but we need to accelerate. I want her to feel completely sidelined by the end of the year." Thomas felt his stomach turn. He kept his eyes forward, his posture rigid. "What about the king?" someone asked. "Charles is manageable," Camilla said. "He's been so preoccupied with international affairs that he hasn't paid attention to the internal dynamics. By the time he notices, it will be too late to reverse." "And if Kate complains?" "She won't," Camilla said confidently. "She's too polite, too concerned about maintaining appearances. She'll suffer in silence, and eventually she'll convince herself that stepping back is the right choice." Then the press officer spoke. "There's one complication. Prince William." The room went quiet. Thomas strained to hear. "William is protective of his wife," the press officer continued. "If he realizes what's happening, he could cause problems." "William is busy with his own responsibilities," Camilla said, "and he trusts me. He won't suspect anything unless someone tells him. If someone does, then we'll deal with it," Camilla said coldly. "But I don't think that will happen. The staff knows better than to get involved. And Kate herself is too isolated to know who to trust." Thomas's hand tightened into a fist. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to keep his face blank. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes. They discussed specific tactics, which events to keep Kate away from, which charitable projects to reassign, how to manage the media narrative if questions arose, and then, finally, they left. Thomas waited until the hallway was empty, then pulled out the recording device and stopped it. His hands were shaking. He had the evidence. Undeniable proof of Camilla's plan. But now came the hardest part. Getting it to Prince William without being discovered. He couldn't use official channels. Couldn't send it electronically. It had to be done in person, quietly, with no trace. He waited until the end of his shift, then changed into civilian clothes and left the palace. He took a bus to a cafe in central London, a place where royal staff sometimes met off duty. He ordered a coffee and sat in the back corner waiting. 30 minutes later, David walked in. He spotted Thomas and sat down across from him. "Do you have it?" David asked quietly. Thomas slid a small envelope across the table. Inside was a USB drive with the recording. "Everything they said is on there," Thomas said. "It's worse than we thought." David pocketed the envelope. "Prince William is meeting with the king tomorrow. He's going to present this evidence privately, away from Camilla. What happens then?" "That depends on the king," David said. "But one way or another, this ends tomorrow." Thomas felt a wave of relief mixed with fear. It was almost over. But the most dangerous part was still ahead. David stood to leave, then paused. "You did the right thing. No matter what happens, remember that?" Thomas nodded. But as he watched David leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was just beginning. That night, he lay in his quarters, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, the king would learn the truth. Tomorrow, Camilla's plan would be exposed. And tomorrow, everything would change. He just hoped that when the dust settled, Princess Kate would finally be safe. King Charles sat in his private study, the weight of the crown heavier than usual. Prince William stood across from him, his face tense and serious. On the desk between them was a laptop, paused on an audio file. "Are you certain about this?" Charles asked quietly. "I've verified everything," William said. "The guard who brought this forward has been with us for 12 years. He has no reason to lie, and the recording speaks for itself." Charles rubbed his temples. He looked older suddenly, the stress of the revelation etched into every line of his face. "Play it again." "Oh." William pressed play. Camilla's voice filled the room, calm and calculated, discussing the plan to isolate Kate, to push her out of royal life, to manipulate the narrative so that her departure would seem like her own choice. When it finished, Charles sat in silence for a long moment. His hands were folded on the desk, his expression unreadable. "I trusted her," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought she understood what this family needs. What the monarchy needs. She understands power," William said, "and she sees Kate as a threat to her own position. Charles looked up at his son. What do you want me to do? I want you to stop her, William said firmly. Kate has done nothing but serve this family with grace and dignity. She doesn't deserve this. And if we allow it to continue, we'll lose her. And the public will never forgive us. Charles stood and walked to the window. Outside, the palace gardens stretched out in perfect order. Everything looked calm, peaceful. But inside these walls, a war had been quietly raging. I'll speak with Camilla tonight, Charles said, privately, and I'll make it clear that this ends now. And the staff involved? William asked. They'll be reassigned, Charles said, quietly. We can't afford a public scandal. William nodded. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something. And more importantly, it would protect Kate. There's one more thing, Charles said, turning back to his son. The guard who brought this forward, Thomas, he took an enormous risk. He did, William agreed. I want to meet him, Charles said, to thank him personally and to ensure he's protected from any retaliation. William felt a flicker of surprise. His father could be distant, formal, but in this moment there was something different in his eyes. Gratitude, and perhaps a bit of shame. I'll arrange it, William said. That evening, Camilla was summoned to the king's study. She arrived expecting a routine discussion about upcoming royal duties. Instead, she found Charles standing by the window, his back to her, his posture rigid. Charles? She said uncertainly. He turned to face her. His expression was cold, disappointed. I know what you've been doing, he said quietly. Camilla's face went pale. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, she tried to recover. I don't know what you mean. Don't lie to me, Charles said, his voice hardening. I've heard the recordings. I've seen the evidence. You've been systematically trying to push Catherine out of her role. Out of this family. Camilla opened her mouth, then closed it. She had no defense. No explanation that would justify what she'd done. Why? Charles asked. Why would you do this? Because she's taking over, Camilla said, her voice rising. Every poll, every article, every public appearance, it's always about Kate. Kate's dress, Kate's charity work, Kate's smile. I'm the queen, Charles, but I'm invisible next to her. So you tried to destroy her, Charles said. You tried to drive her away because you were jealous. I was protecting my position, Camilla said. Our position. No, Charles said firmly. You were protecting your ego. And in doing so, you've damaged this family in ways that may never fully heal. Walked to his desk and picked up a folder. Effective immediately, you will have no involvement in decisions regarding Catherine's schedule, her public appearances, or her charitable work. The staff members who assisted you will be reassigned. And if I ever discover that you've attempted anything like this again, there will be consequences. Serious ones. Camilla stared at him, stunned. You're choosing her over me. What? I'm choosing what's right, Charles said. As I should have done from the beginning, Camilla turned and left without another word. The door closed behind her with a quiet click. Charles sat down heavily in his chair. He felt exhausted, betrayed, but also relieved. The truth was out. And now, finally, things could begin to heal. The next morning, Thomas was summoned to a private meeting. He expected David. Instead, found himself face to face with King Charles and Prince William. He immediately stood at attention, his heart racing. At ease, Charles said gently, Please, sit. Thomas sat, unsure of what was happening. Charles leaned forward. I want to thank you for what you've done. You showed extraordinary courage and integrity. You risked your career, perhaps even your safety, to protect a member of this family. That will not be forgotten. Thomas felt his throat tighten. I only did what was right, Your Majesty. Many people know what's right, William said. If you have the courage to act on it, oh. Charles nodded. You'll be given a commendation. Discreetly, of course. And we'll ensure you're assigned to a position where your talents are properly valued. Thank you, sir, Thomas said quietly. As he left the room, Thomas felt lighter than he had in weeks. It was over. Kate was safe. and justice, in its own quiet way, had been served. 3 months later, Princess Kate stood in the grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace, addressing a crowd of supporters for one of her charitable foundations. She looked radiant, confident, and most importantly, at peace. In the back of the room, Thomas stood at his post. He was no longer just another guard. He'd been promoted to a more senior security position, one that came with respect and responsibility. But more than that, he had the quiet satisfaction of knowing he'd made a difference. Kate finished her speech to thunderous applause. As she stepped down from the podium, she glanced around the room, and for just a moment, her eyes met Thomas's. She gave him a small, knowing smile. She didn't know the full story. William had kept the details private, protecting both Kate and Thomas from the weight of what had happened. But somehow, Kate seemed to understand that someone had been looking out for her. Someone had cared enough to take a stand. Thomas returned the smile with a small nod. After the event, William approached him privately. "She's doing well," William said. "Better than I've seen her in months." "I'm glad, sir," Thomas said. William clasped his shoulder. "You gave her that. You gave her back her voice, her place in this family. I won't forget that. It's for Camilla. She remained queen in title, but her influence had been quietly diminished. The staff who had once reported to her now answered to others. Her private meetings were monitored. Her public appearances were carefully managed. She had been contained, her power stripped away piece by piece. Some in the palace whispered that she was bitter, that she resented the loss of control. But she said nothing publicly. Perhaps she understood that she had been given a second chance, one that could easily be taken away. King Charles, for his part, threw himself into his duties with renewed focus. He made a point of publicly supporting Kate's work, attending her events, praising her contributions. It was his way of making amends, of showing the world that she was valued, and slowly, the palace began to heal. The wounds weren't gone. Trust had been broken, relationships strained. But there was a new awareness now, a recognition that even within these ancient walls, with all their tradition and protocol, people could be hurt, used to cast aside. And sometimes, it took just one person, one act of courage. To change everything, Thomas returned to his duties with a quiet pride. He would never speak publicly about what he'd done. He would never seek recognition or reward. That wasn't why he'd come forward. He'd done it because it was right. Because Kate deserved better. Because someone had to stand up. And in the end, that was enough. As he stood watch that evening, looking out over the palace grounds, Thomas thought about everything that had happened. The fear, the risk, the moments when he'd almost given up. But then he thought about Kate's smile, about the relief in William's eyes, about the justice that had been quietly served, and he knew without a doubt that he would do it all over again, because some things are worth fighting for, some people are worth protecting, and sometimes, even in a palace full of power and privilege, a single act of courage can change everything. The story of what happened behind those palace walls would never be told publicly. The recordings would remain sealed. The documents would be locked away. History would move on, unaware of the quiet battle that had been waged. But for those who knew, for those who had lived through it, truth would always remain. That loyalty isn't about blindly following orders. It's about standing up for what's right. Even when it costs you everything, and that, in the end, is what makes a true royal guard, not the uniform, not the title, not the post, but the courage to protect those who cannot protect themselves, and the integrity to do what's right. Even when no one is watching, Thomas would carry that with him for the rest of his life, and Princess Kate would continue to shine, never knowing the full story of the man who had saved her place in the palace. But perhaps, in some quiet way, she knew, and that was enough.